My husband came home kissing his mistress, not knowing I'd planned a surprise party for him with the whole family. My husband turned 40, and for weeks I treated it like a deadline. His father had died at 39, so 40 felt like a finish line we were supposed to celebrate to push back fear. I planned a surprise at our house, called in family, booked his mother's flight, and spent the morning pretending nothing was happening. By nightfall, the living room was dark and holding its breath. I thought the worst thing that could happen was the cake leaning. I was wrong. My name is Kala, and I'm telling you this like I'd tell a close friend, because the polished version of this story makes me feel like I'm lying. I was in my mid-30s, and I'd spent most of my adult life learning how to speak softly around a man who took up all the space. We lived in the house his dad left behind, the one that ended up in his mother's name after all the paperwork. So day to day it felt like ours, even though on paper it never really was. That little detail is going to matter, unfortunately. I planned the surprise party the way people plan a tiny wedding they swear they aren't planning. I had lists on my phone, sticky notes on the fridge, reminders that went off at the most inconvenient times. I made a guest list that was mostly family and a few close friends, the people we always saw around holidays and the people who still answered his calls even when he'd been cranky for weeks. I booked a small local musician for background music and then panicked about it because I hate attention, and apparently I married attention's biggest fan. I ordered decorations from a generic party supply site, nothing fancy, just warm lights and banners and balloons in colors he liked. I picked the cake after scrolling through so many options that I started seeing frosting in my sleep. The biggest thing, the thing I felt proud of, was getting his mother to come. She lived in another state, and traveling was hard for her, not because she couldn't, but because she always made it sound like the world had personally wronged her by requiring shoes and schedules. She and I got along in this tense, careful way, like two people holding a fragile plate between them, both pretending they weren't thinking about dropping it. Still, I called her. I organized her flight. I even arranged for someone to pick her up. And every time she complained, I swallowed it because I wanted my husband to have his mom there. Also because I was raised to keep the peace, and I'm still unlearning that. Apparently, one swallowed complaint at a time. The morning of the party, I acted like it was just another day. Over coffee, I mentioned I might stop by my parents' place that night, casual, like I hadn't been hiding a living room full of party supplies in the spare closet. My husband barely looked up from his phone. He made this little noise, not a full reply, just a hum that said, "Sure." And I told myself he was distracted because work had been stressful lately. He'd been staying later than usual, coming home with that smell of office air and fake energy. And he kept saying he was trying to get ahead before the end of the quarter. I believed him because it fit the narrative I wanted. Before all of this, if you'd asked me to describe our marriage, I would have said fine. In that way people say it when they don't want to look too closely. By then, we'd been married 11 years, long enough that people assumed we were solid even when we were just practiced. We weren't one of those couples who screamed at each other in public or posted cringe couple quotes on a social media app, but we also weren't warm. He liked routines. He liked control. He liked things that made him look like he had it together. I loved him, but I also spent years editing myself around his moods. Like if I used the right tone and picked the right moment, I could keep the peace. Spoiler, you can't keep the peace with someone who treats peace like a prize you have to earn. When we first got married, I assumed team meant shared dreams. He treated it like shared access. It started small, questions about my purchases, jokes about my spending, a suggestion that we merge everything to make budgeting easier. Then it stopped being a suggestion. He reviewed statements, labeled my choices impulsive, and framed any pushback as me being irresponsible. So I shrank to keep the peace. I told myself it was normal compromise, that marriage was work, that love meant adjusting. Now I hear how practiced that sounds. Then, a few years in, he started talking about his dad more. Like the number 40 had moved from background fear to full obsession. He'd look at life like a checklist and panic when he didn't like what he saw. That's when the temporary idea happened. He said if I quit and stayed home, he could focus harder, climb faster, make more money, and we'd be set. He made it sound like we were both sacrificing for the future. But really, it was me sacrificing for his comfort. I told him I'd do it for a year. Then it was, just until this project ends. Then it was, we can't afford childcare if you go back. Except there were no kids. There was just me at home, trying to make my life smaller so his could feel bigger. And look, I'm not pretending I was perfect. I got resentful. I got snappy. I got clingy in ways that embarrassed me. I'd ask him to come home earlier and then hate myself for sounding needy. I'd pick fights over stupid things because I didn't know how to say the big things without crying. Sometimes I'd spend a whole afternoon deep cleaning the house like an anxious raccoon, And then when he walked in and barely noticed, I'd feel this insane urge to throw a sponge at his head. I never did, but the urge was there. The year leading up to the party, he got different. Not just stressed, different. He started caring about how he looked in a way he hadn't before. Buying new shirts, switching cologne, suddenly remembering haircuts. He started taking calls outside. He'd angle his phone away from me like it was instinct. If I asked who he was texting, he'd say, "Work," too quickly, like a kid caught with candy. Once I glanced at his screen and saw a heart emoji next to a name, and when I asked about it, he laughed and said it was a joke from the office. I wanted to believe that so badly that I made myself laugh too. The worst part is I did have that feeling, that quiet, sick feeling, but every time it showed up, I talked myself out of it because confronting him meant risking the life I'd built around him, and I wasn't ready to admit I'd built my whole stability on someone who could yank it away. By late afternoon, our house looked like it had swallowed a celebration. I moved furniture around, I set out snacks, I lined up drinks in the kitchen, and I kept checking my phone like it was going to betray me by flashing "surprise ruined" across the screen. People started arriving around 6, slipping in quietly, whispering and smiling, doing that thing adults do where they try to be stealthy and somehow end up louder. Someone's kid dropped a toy and the sound felt like a gunshot in the silence. Everyone froze, then laughed too hard. My heart was doing this annoying sprinting thing, like it wanted to be the main character. We turned off the lights and waited. The house became that weird dark, full of bodies holding their breath, the kind of silence where you can hear someone's stomach growl across the room. I stood by the doorway, my hands sticky from frosting because I'd fixed a little smudge on the cake and somehow made it worse, and I kept picturing my husband's face when he walked in and saw everyone. I kept picturing him smiling, maybe even tearing up, and for a second I let myself imagine that the next year of our marriage would be lighter, like we were turning a corner. I was adorable. I want to slap past me, honestly. The garage door rumbled and I felt my whole body go tight, like a string pulled too far. I heard the car door shut. I heard voices, muffled, close, a laugh that wasn't his. The front door opened and everyone jumped out of hiding and shouted, "Surprise!" And the lights snapped on like a spotlight. And there he was, swaying slightly, tie crooked, shirt wrinkled, looking like he'd spent the last hour losing a fight with gravity. Later, he'd swear he thought I was at my parents', and that he was too drunk to think straight, and she was the one pushing, whispering, "Just go in. It's fine." His arm was around a woman I didn't know well enough to call anything but the woman, except I did know her. Technically, because she worked under him at his company. She had that younger, polished look, hair done, makeup intact, like she hadn't been crying into a bathroom mirror wondering what her life had become. They were kissing. Not a peck. Not a drunk mistake. A full, confident kiss. Like the world was theirs, and no one else existed. The sound that came out of the room wasn't screaming or gasping. It was silence. The kind of silence that lands heavy, like it has weight. Someone coughed. Someone's laugh died halfway through and turned into this awkward wheeze. I saw his mother in the crowd, her hand covering her mouth, eyes wide in a way that made her look suddenly older. I saw our friends, people we'd eaten dinner with, people who'd helped us move furniture, staring like they'd been slapped. I saw my own hand still holding the serving knife like I was going to cut the cake or cut someone. Don't worry, I did neither. I'm dramatic, not unhinged. My husband pulled back first, blinking like he'd just noticed gravity was a thing. The woman's lipstick was smeared, her smile fading as she realized this wasn't some private fantasy moment. His eyes scanned the room, confused, and then he registered his mother, and his face did this weird shift, like surprise turned into irritation, like we'd caught him doing something embarrassing, and now he had to deal with it. His mother stood up so fast her chair scraped. "What is this?" she said, voice sharp. Not even asking, more like issuing a verdict. "What are you doing?" My husband exhaled like she was nagging him about chores. He looked at me, and for a second I thought he'd apologize. Like, oh my God, I messed up. Something human. Instead, he said, "Well, this is awkward." The woman tried to straighten her dress, eyes darting around, and I noticed she was holding her purse like a shield. My husband's hand stayed on her waist, protective, almost proud. The humiliation hit me so hard it felt physical, like heat climbing my neck. I heard my own voice before I fully decided to use it. "Why is she here?" I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, which honestly was a miracle because my insides were basically a blender. "Why are you bringing her into our house?" He blinked. "I didn't plan this," he said. Like that mattered. "No, I did," I snapped. and a couple people winced because it was so blunt. I planned your birthday. I planned your mother's flight. I planned the cake. I planned every little detail because I thought you'd be happy. And you walk in here like this. He looked past me at the decorations, the food, the cake, and then back at me, and I swear to you, he looked annoyed, like my effort was an inconvenience. Then he did the thing that shattered whatever part of me still wanted to believe this was fixable. He shrugged and said, I'm tired of pretending. I heard a couple people inhale. His mother made a sound like she was about to cry or yell or both. My husband kept going because once he started, it was like he was giving a speech he'd rehearsed in his head, the kind of speech that makes you feel righteous while you destroy someone. I've been thinking about it, he said, his words slow, thick with alcohol and confidence. My dad didn't even make it to 40. I've been living like I have all the time in the world. And I don't. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to spend my life in something that doesn't make me happy. I stared at him. So you're blaming your father dying on you cheating on me? I said, and my laugh came out sharp, almost a bark. That's your excuse? He rolled his eyes. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just choosing. I'm choosing what feels real. The woman next to him lifted her chin, like she was proud to be his real. She looked at me with this tiny smile that wasn't even kind of sorry. His mother took a step forward, trembling. You're humiliating your wife, she said, in front of everyone in my husband's house. My husband's jaw tightened. It's not your house, he said automatically, and then corrected himself because people were watching. I mean, it's family. It's mine too. His mother's eyes narrowed, and I saw something in her shift, but I didn't have time to process it because my brain was stuck on one thing. He was confessing to an affair in front of our friends like it was a brave act. Like he was the victim of his own boring marriage. I felt my hands move before my dignity could stop them. I picked up the cake. The whole cake. 2 hands, careful, heavy, frosting soft. There was a moment where my brain screamed, don't, and my anger screamed louder. Do it. So I did. I shoved the cake forward, right into his chest and face, and frosting exploded like a ridiculous, sugary bomb. It got in his hair, on his shirt, across his cheek. It splattered the woman too, mostly on her shoulder and the side of her dress. Someone in the back let out a shocked laugh, and then immediately covered their mouth. I can't even blame them. It looked absurd. It was absurd. That was my marriage, apparently. My husband wiped frosting from his eyes and yelled, "What the hell is wrong with you?" I stared at him, breathing hard. "What's wrong with me?" I said, voice shaking now. "You just kissed your mistress in front of your mother and you want to ask what's wrong with me?" His mother said the woman's name, quietly, like she couldn't believe she was saying it. The woman's face went red, not from the frosting, but from being seen. She tried to step back, but my husband pulled her close again. "Don't call her that," he snapped at his mother like his mother was the rude one. That's when his mother's voice went cold. "Go upstairs," she said to him. "Clean yourself up. And then you'll explain why you think you can bring this into the house my husband left behind." My husband looked like he wanted to argue, but he also looked embarrassed. And embarrassment is his least favorite emotion, so he stormed upstairs. The woman stood there with frosting sliding down her arm, eyes wide, and the room felt like a courtroom where everyone had already decided she was guilty. I walked toward her without thinking. My feet felt heavy. My cheeks burned. I grabbed her arm, not gently, and pulled her toward the door. "Out," I said. She jerked her arm back. "Don't touch me," she snapped, like she had rights in my living room. "You can't just assault me." His mother stepped beside me, fast. "You have a lot of nerve," she said to the woman, voice rising. "A lot. Coming here. Coming into my husband's home." The woman's eyes flicked over her, then back to me, and her mouth curled. "Maybe he brought me because he actually likes me," she said, and the words hit like a slap. "Maybe he's tired of—" She glanced at the decorations, the cake destruction, the staring guests. "Whatever this is," I felt my body go hot. My stomach flipped. "Whatever this is," I repeated, laughing without humor. "You mean the marriage you've been sleeping with?" She shrugged. And this is the part that still makes my blood boil when I remember it. She shrugged like I was a sad stranger at a bus stop. "He chose me," she said. "You can act crazy if you want, but he's leaving you." I don't remember deciding to slap her. I remember my hand moving, the sound sharp in the doorway, the way her head turned and her eyes went huge. The room erupted in noise, not cheering, not yelling, just chaos. People talking over each other, someone saying my name like they could stop me by naming me. His mother actually lunged forward like she might do worse, and then stopped herself, breathing hard, hands shaking. The woman pressed her hand to her cheek and hissed, "I'm going to sue you." She also threatened to call the police right then, loud enough for everyone to hear, but she didn't actually do it. I think she knew what would happen if officers showed up. Questions, statements, and a whole public explanation of why my husband's subordinate was standing in his mother's doorway in the first place. She wanted leverage, not a spotlight. His mother laughed, bitter. "Good luck," she said. "You'll need it." My husband stomped back downstairs in a different shirt, hair damp from the sink, face red with rage. He took one look at the woman holding her cheek and snapped into protective mode like she was the wounded one. "You hit her?" he shouted at me. "I did," I said. And the fact that I admitted it so calmly even surprised me. She called my marriage whatever this is in my own doorway. He pointed at me like I was a stranger. "You're unstable," he said, loud enough for everyone. "This is why I'm done. This is why I can't do this anymore." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something else. I wanted to rewind time and not marry him in the first place. Instead, I stood there, frosting in my hair, cake crumbs on my shirt, and I realized he was doing it on purpose. He was building a story where I was the problem, where I was the crazy wife and he was the brave man escaping. His mother turned to him, voice trembling. "You're using your father's death like a shield," she said. "You think he'd be proud of this?" My husband's face tightened. "Don't talk about him," he said. "Then stop invoking him to justify your choices," she shot back. The woman tugged on my husband's sleeve and whispered something, and he nodded like she was the boss. Then he surprised me by walking toward the stairs and grabbing a bag that I hadn't seen before. A duffel he must have packed on the way up, like he'd already planned this part. He slung it over his shoulder like a traveler, not a husband. "I'm not staying here tonight," he said, and he said it like he was doing me a favor. "We'll talk later when you're calm." I laughed again, because what else do you do when someone tells you to be calm after they torch your life in front of your friends? "Don't worry," I said, voice low. I'll be calm. I'll be calm in a way you've never seen." His mother stepped between us, and for the first time all night, she looked directly at me like she was seeing me. "Everyone needs to go," she told the guests. Loud, polite, shaking. "Thank you for coming. I'm sorry. Please, please go." People left in a wave of awkwardness, murmuring apologies, touching my arm like I was fragile. The musician hovered near the wall with his case half open like he didn't know if he should vanish or play a funeral march. And then he slipped out too, eyes down, like none of us could blame him for wanting to pretend he hadn't seen it. After the last car pulled away, my phone started buzzing like it had a vendetta. Messages, missed calls, people sending, "Are you okay?" Like that question meant anything when your life had just been split open in your own doorway. I barely slept. I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, replaying the lights turning on, the kiss, the faces in the room, my own hands shoving cake into his chest like it was the only language my body knew. The next morning, I woke up hollow, like my brain was still stuck in the doorway. My hair smelled like sugar. The living room still smelled like stale wine and disaster. Balloons had drifted into corners and died there like little bright ghosts. On the day after that, his mother and I scrubbed frosting out of the rug and tried not to fall apart over a sponge. Texts from friends saying they loved me. Texts from people I barely knew saying they were here if I needed anything. Which is sweet, but also weird because what does that even mean at midnight when your husband just walked out with his girlfriend? His aunt called and left a voicemail that started with, "Honey," and ended with, "I don't know what to say," which was fair because I also didn't know what to say. I listened to the messages one by one, and every single one felt like someone pressing a bruise. I tried calling my own mother because apparently I still default to call mom in a crisis, even though my mother and I have never had that soft, comforting relationship. She answered on the second ring and I told her, choking on the words, "He cheated. He brought her here, in front of everyone." There was a pause, and then my mother sighed like I'd just told her my car needed an oil change. "Well," she said, "you shouldn't have embarrassed him." I stared at the wall, stunned. "I embarrassed him?" I whispered. "You threw a cake?" she said, like the affair was a side note and the frosting was the headline. Men don't like that kind of drama. I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there in the dark living room and realized something ugly. My marriage wasn't the only place I'd been taught to swallow my feelings to make other people comfortable. That was bigger than him. That was my whole life. The next day, my mother texted me a long message about staying calm and not making rash decisions and marriage vows. and I couldn't even read it without shaking. I wanted her to be angry for me. I wanted her to say, "Pack his things, you deserve better." Instead, she acted like my job was to keep a man who'd already left. That's when I decided I was done asking for support from people who only offered it if I behaved. I didn't tell his mother about that call. Not then. I kept it to myself for days because I didn't want to poison the only support I had with another reminder that my own family would still rather blame me than blame him. I didn't want to poison the small amount of comfort I had in that house. I just swallowed it again and pretended I was fine while we stepped over balloon strings and wiped frosting off the wall. Also, the mess was unreal. Cake on the floor, smeared frosting on the light switch, sticky footprints because someone stepped in it and then walked around. I scrubbed and scrubbed because I needed something physical to do, something I could control. His mother kept grabbing paper towels and muttering, "Unbelievable," like she was trying to erase the night with sheer stubbornness. At one point, I found my husband's wedding band in the bathroom sink. I just stared at it, sitting there in a little puddle of water, and I felt this sharp, stupid hope for half a second, like maybe he'd forgotten it by accident and would come back for it with regret. Then I realized he probably took it off before he even got home, because rings don't stop people who want to cheat. I picked it up, dried it, and put it in a drawer. I didn't throw it away. I wasn't ready to be that final. That afternoon, his mother got a call from him and put it on speaker because she was done protecting him. He said he wanted to talk things out, and his voice had this calm, fake, rational tone, like he was negotiating a contract. He said I needed to control myself and apologize for the assault, and I felt my stomach twist. Then he asked his mother when she was flying home, like he was planning his schedule. His mother stared at the phone like it was garbage and said, "I'm not leaving her alone." And he got quiet, and then he said, "So you're choosing her?" "Yes," she said, and it was so blunt I almost laughed. "I'm choosing the person who didn't set fire to the family in my living room." He hung up on her, like a teenager. A 40-year-old man, hanging up on his mother because she didn't validate his betrayal. I stood in the doorway and watched the last guest drift away like my life was a party that ended early. A few minutes later, my husband and the woman left too, rushing out like fugitives, and my husband didn't even look back. Not once. When the door shut, the house felt huge and empty, like it had been hollowed out. His mother sank onto the couch, shoulders slumped, and I just stood there because sitting felt like admitting it was real. I heard myself make this small sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "I made the stupid decorations match the stupid plates," I said, and then I started crying so hard I couldn't breathe. His mother reached for me, hesitant, like she didn't know if she was allowed, and then she pulled me into a hug. It wasn't a gentle hug. It was tight, almost angry, like she was holding me and also holding herself together. "I'm sorry," she said into my hair. "I'm so sorry." I shook my head, tears hot, mascara probably running, not that it mattered. "I quit my job for him," I blurted, and it sounded like a confession I'd been hiding. "He wanted me home. He wanted dinner done. He wanted the house perfect. He said it was temporary just until he got ahead. And then years passed and I kept waiting for the part where it was my turn again." His mother pulled back and looked at me, eyes glossy. "You did that?" she whispered, like she hadn't realized. I wanted to laugh again because of course she hadn't. My sacrifices were always quiet, like background noise. I wiped my face with my sleeve like a teenager. "The house isn't even in our names," I said, and my voice sounded small. "I never thought about it because why would I? I thought we were a team." Her eyes sharpened. "The house is in my name," she said, clear, firm. "It was in my husband's name. Then it was transferred to me. Your husband doesn't own it. He's always known that. He just forgets when it's convenient." I stared at her. "So, what happens now?" I asked, and I hated how scared I sounded. She took a deep breath, like she was choosing something. "Now," she said, "you stay. He doesn't." I blinked, unsure I heard correctly. "What?" She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands clasped. "He humiliated you," she said, voice shaking with anger now. "He humiliated me. He humiliated his father's memory in my living room. I'm done protecting him from consequences. If he wants to build a new life with that woman, he can do it somewhere else." My throat tightened. "But I'm not family anymore if we divorce," I said, because my brain likes to ruin good moments with fear. His mother's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more like stubbornness. "You've been family," she said, "and right now, You're the only one acting like it. 2 mornings later, I woke up on the couch because I still couldn't stand being in our bed, and the house still smelled faintly of frosting and stale wine, like the night was refusing to leave. I found balloons in weird places, like one had floated into the hallway and died there. I stood in the kitchen in yesterday's clothes, staring at the sink, and I had this brief, irrational thought that if I just cleaned everything, it would feel normal again. It didn't. Shocking. His mother was already up, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, and that look she gets when she's decided something and the world can argue with her if it wants. She slid a piece of paper toward me. "It's a lease," she said. I stared. "A lease?" "A rental agreement," she corrected, like wording mattered. "You're going to be a tenant. It's going to be official. If he tries to claim you're trespassing, he can't. If he tries to kick you out, he can't." My hands shook as I read it. Not because it was complicated, but because it was real. It was her putting her decision into writing, making it harder to undo. "Are you sure?" I asked, and my voice cracked. This is going to make him furious. She took a sip of coffee like she could drink fury. "Let him be furious," she said. "He's been comfortable for too long." We went to a small local office where a lawyer sat behind a desk and explained things in simple terms, and I nodded like I understood, even though my brain kept drifting to images of my husband's face covered in cake. The lawyer asked me basic questions like what I did for work, how long we'd been married, whether there were kids, and every answer felt like I was listing the pieces of my life for an inventory. When I said I wasn't working full-time anymore, he raised his eyebrows in that polite way people do when they're thinking, "That's going to complicate things." I felt defensive, like I had to justify it, so I blurted out, "It made sense at the time." And the lawyer just nodded like he'd heard that sentence 1,000 times. He probably had. His mother kept interrupting to clarify the house history, because she wanted it very clear that the property belonged to her. She said it with that firm tone that doesn't invite debate, and I watched the lawyer's pen move faster like he was thinking, "Okay, this part is clean." Before we left, the lawyer said something that made my stomach unclench by one notch. He explained that my husband had left that night on his own, with a packed bag, and that as the owner, his mother could revoke permission and document it. "Do it through paper," he said, tapping the desk, "not through arguing at the door." His mother nodded like she'd been born for paperwork revenge. After we signed, the lawyer suggested I document everything, save messages, keep a timeline, the kind of advice that makes you feel like your life is a case file. I hated it, but I also knew my husband was the type to twist stories, so I started doing it. I made a folder on my laptop, dumped screenshots in it, wrote down dates in a little notebook, not because I wanted drama, but because I didn't trust him not to create it. Back at the house, his mother insisted we change the locks, and for once, we didn't do it impulsively. We did it because the lawyer told us to treat the house like what it legally was, her property, not his entitlement. The lawyer drafted a simple written notice that his access was revoked and that any communication about belongings would go through counsel. Then we called a local locksmith. A tired man showed up, replaced the locks, and didn't ask questions, which I appreciated. When he handed me the new keys, I held them too tightly, like metal could keep me safe. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because I missed my husband, but because my brain kept replaying the party like a highlight reel I couldn't shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lights turning on, the kiss, the faces in the room. I kept thinking about what people would say. I kept thinking about whether they'd feel sorry for me or secretly think I deserved it. I hated that I cared. But humiliation is a sticky emotion. It clings. So I got up at 3 a.m. and opened my laptop and started applying for jobs like my life depended on it. Because it did. I filled out applications while sitting in my pajamas with a mug of cold tea, typing my experience with shaky hands, trying to explain gaps without sounding pathetic. I'd been out of my field long enough that my resume looked like it had taken a nap. I wanted to scream at my husband, "Look what you did!" But he wasn't there. And that was the point. He'd left me to deal with the consequences of choices he'd pushed me into. His mother found me the next morning and just stood there in the doorway, watching me stare at the screen. "You don't have to fix everything overnight," she said gently. I laughed, tired. "If I don't, who will?" I asked, and my voice cracked. "He won't. My parents won't. It's me." She came over and squeezed my shoulder. "Then we'll do it step by step," she said, and something in me loosened a little. Not because everything was okay, but because someone was finally saying, "You don't have to do it alone." Over the next couple weeks, I started keeping my days structured on purpose, because unstructured time made me spiral. I'd wake up, shower, force myself into real clothes, even if I was staying home, because staying in pajamas felt like surrender. I'd clean. I'd apply for jobs. I'd go for a walk around the neighborhood just to prove to myself I could exist outside the house without collapsing. Sometimes I'd see a neighbor and smile like I wasn't the woman whose husband had publicly detonated her marriage. Sometimes I'd see pity in their eyes and I'd go home and cry anyway. And the whole time, I was waiting for my husband to show up. I knew he would. He wasn't the type to quietly accept being shut out. He was the type to show up and demand reality bend back into place. When we got back from the lawyer, his mother looked at the chaos of party leftovers and said, "Let's pack his things." I expected to feel devastated, like I was erasing him, but instead I felt this strange, steady focus. I grabbed boxes from the garage. I folded his clothes with a kind of angry precision. I found random stuff in drawers, receipts, old notes, socks without matches. Every item felt like a tiny piece of our life that I'd been carrying without noticing. I packed it all anyway. His mother worked beside me, quiet but present, and every once in a while she'd mutter something like, "Unbelievable," or, "I didn't raise him like this." And I could tell she was processing her own grief, not just for our marriage, but for the man she thought her son was. By the end of the weekend, the house was full of boxes stacked by the front porch. His mother wanted it handled clean, so the lawyer helped her send a basic written notice. He had a short window to pick up his things, and after that, whatever happened to those boxes was on him. I checked the weather on my phone and saw rain in the forecast. A lot of rain. I stared at the boxes and had a moment where I thought, I should cover them because I'm not a monster. Then I remembered him calling me unstable and telling everyone I was the reason he cheated, and my kindness evaporated. So I left them. I left his life in cardboard boxes on the porch like a warning. His mother arranged for security cameras to be installed, simple ones, nothing fancy, but enough to record if he tried to do something stupid. I hated that we even had to think that way, but I also hated that part of me expected him to show up screaming. Again, theme. A week passed, then another, and in that time my husband sent a handful of messages that bounced between cold and dramatic. One minute he was all, "We need to be adults about this," and the next he was saying I'd ruined his life, like he hadn't started the fire. The woman sent me one message, a long one, full of self-righteousness and fake concern, like she was doing me a favor by taking my husband off my hands. I didn't reply. I stared at it, heart pounding, and then I blocked her. I lurked once or twice. I'm human. The day he came back, I was sitting on the floor in the living room surrounded by paperwork because I'd finally started the divorce process, and my hands were stained with ink from filling out forms. The camera app on my phone pinged and my stomach dropped before I even looked. There he was, in the driveway, stepping out of the car like he owned the place. The woman beside him with sunglasses on like she was trying to look unbothered. He walked to the door and tried the old key. He tried it again, harder, then yanked the knob like violence would unlock it. When it didn't work, he knocked, polite at first, and then the knocks turned into pounding. I didn't move. I just watched through the camera, my heart thumping, and I realized something. I didn't have to open the door. I didn't have to face him on his terms. I pressed the button to speak through the camera. "What are you doing?" I asked, and my voice sounded calm, which honestly was the most satisfying part. He jerked his head like he'd been startled. "Open the door," he demanded. "This is ridiculous." "Why are you here?" I asked again, because I was stubborn and also because I wanted him to say it out loud. He scoffed. "To get my things," he said, "and to tell you to be out by the end of the week. I gave you enough time." I laughed, not loud, just a quick exhale. "You didn't give me anything," I said. "You left, remember? With your girlfriend, in front of your mother, in front of everyone." The woman beside him rolled her eyes so hard I saw it through the camera. "God," she muttered. And even through the audio, it sounded like she was bored of me being a person. My husband looked past the camera and finally noticed the porch, the boxes. The rain had come and gone, and the cardboard was warped, stained, sagging. Some of the tape had loosened. A few things had shifted, fabric peeking out. His face changed, not into sadness, but into fury. "What the hell is that?" he shouted. "Your stuff," I said. "You should probably grab it before the next storm." He started pacing, hands in his hair. "You did this on purpose," he said. "Yeah," I said, and it felt good to admit it. I did. He slammed his fist against the door. "You can't keep me out," he yelled. "This is my house." "It's not," I said, and I kept my voice even because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of hearing me shake. It belongs to your mother, and I have a lease. You got written notice that your access was revoked. If you keep pounding on the door, I'm calling the police for a disturbance." He froze like his brain needed a second to catch up. Then he pulled out his phone and called his mother right there on my porch, pacing like a teenager tattling. I couldn't hear his mother's voice, but I could see his expression shift as the conversation went on. Confident to confused to angry to smaller. He said, "What do you mean you signed a lease?" And then, "Are you serious?" And then, "You can't do this?" And then finally he went quiet, jaw clenched, listening. The woman whispered something to him, probably telling him to calm down, but he wasn't built for calm. He kicked one of the boxes and it collapsed, spilling damp clothes onto the porch. He kicked another. He started throwing things into the air like a tantrum was going to reverse paperwork. A neighbor across the street stepped outside, phone raised. Not subtle, not threatening, just filming. My husband noticed and stopped mid-kick, chest heaving. The neighbor shouted, "Leave, man!" And the woman looked embarrassed, tugging at my husband's arm. Between the door camera and my neighbor filming, it was already documented. I didn't call the police. Public embarrassment was doing the job, and I refused to hand him another story where he could claim I overreacted. He glared at the camera on my door like he wanted to punch it. "You're enjoying this," he hissed. "I'm surviving it," I said, and my voice got a little softer, not because I felt sorry for him, but because the truth was heavy. There's a difference. He muttered curses while shoving soggy things back into boxes, and the woman stood there with her arms crossed like she was waiting for an employee to finish loading a car. He loaded everything, slammed the trunk, and before he got in, he leaned toward the camera. "This isn't over," he said. I stared at the screen. "It is for me," I said quietly, and then I ended the call. After that, my phone became a landfill of messages. Voicemails from him, from her, sometimes even from random relatives who had heard my side through the grapevine and decided to share their thoughts. People love having opinions when they aren't the ones crying on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m. The woman sent a voice message calling me petty, calling me bitter, calling me a witch. My husband sent one where he sounded like he was trying to be charming again, like he could talk me into being reasonable, and then another where he sounded like he hated me. I blocked them both. Again. More permanently this time. I changed my number a week later because I was tired of flinching every time my phone buzzed. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was numbness. I'd wake up, make coffee, stare at the wall, and then remember, oh right, my husband had detonated our marriage and blamed me for it. And I'd feel sick all over again. Some days I barely ate. Other days I ate whatever was easiest just to keep moving. I cried when I could, and I kept functioning because I had to. A few days later, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, and I did something I'd been thinking about since the party but kept avoiding because I didn't want to be the crazy ex. I wrote an email to his company's human resources department. I stared at the blank screen for a long time. I typed a sentence, deleted it, typed again, deleted again. I kept thinking, if I do this, he'll say I'm vindictive. He'll tell people I ruined his career. And then another part of me would answer, he ruined his career the moment he started sleeping with someone who reported to him. He just didn't want consequences. So I wrote it. I wrote that my husband had been involved in a relationship with a subordinate. I wrote that they brought it into our home and exposed it publicly. I wrote dates I knew, events I remembered, the times he'd come home late with excuses that now sounded stupid. I kept it factual, not poetic, not dramatic, just clear. I hit send and immediately felt like I was going to throw up. For a week, nothing happened, and I spiraled. Then I heard, through that same grapevine people pretend they don't use, that he'd been put on leave while they looked into it. They interviewed people, pulled schedules, asked about promotions, and suddenly a bunch of little quirks everyone had ignored were being said out loud in a room. He denied it at first. Of course he did. And she played dumb. But the more they dug, the uglier it got. Then I got a message from someone I vaguely knew, a coworker of his who'd been friendly at holiday parties. It was short, careful, and it basically said, "They're investigating." I sat there staring at the screen, my heart pounding, and I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, like I'd just lifted something heavy and now my arms were shaking. Over the next few weeks, more information trickled in through the same social network that had fed off my humiliation. Apparently other people had complaints too. Apparently the woman had been getting special treatment for months. Easier projects, better evaluations, flexible hours. People had noticed. People had been annoyed. They just hadn't had a reason to say it out loud until now. I hated that part. Honestly, I hated that my pain became a convenient opening for other people's grievances, but I also couldn't pretend it didn't matter because favoritism in a workplace isn't just annoying, it's unfair. And yes, I know I sound like a teacher, but it's true. About 6 weeks after I sent the email, a coworker of his texted me 2 words: "He's out." My stomach dropped, not because I felt bad for him, but because I knew what he'd do next. Sure enough, his mother called that night and said he'd already screamed at her about being fired, like it was something someone did to him instead of the result of his own mess. "He got fired," she told me, "and he's trying to make it your fault." I whispered, "He's going to blame me." His mother's smile was cold. "Let him," she said. "He needs someone to blame because he can't stand the idea that he did this to himself." The divorce process was its own slow nightmare. Not dramatic in a movie way, just exhausting in a paperwork way. I hired a lawyer because I wasn't about to be outsmarted by a man who had already proven he'd rewrite reality. My husband got a lawyer too, and for a while it was like the lawyers were the ones married. Sending emails, scheduling meetings, negotiating while I sat on the couch feeling like a guest in my own life. My husband tried to make the slap a big thing. Of course he did. In the middle of all that, he tried to rewrite the story publicly. Not in some giant scandal way, but in the everyday coward way, telling people we grew apart, telling people I'd been difficult, telling people the woman was just someone who understood him. One of our friends called me, the one who always tries to be neutral, and said, "He's saying you two have been unhappy for a long time." I almost laughed because, yes, we were unhappy, but not in the mutual, respectful way he was pretending. He was unhappy because I existed as a person with needs. I was unhappy because I'd been shrinking for years. That phone call triggered something in me, and I did a thing I regret. I unblocked him for a minute and sent a message. Not a mature one, not a calm one. Something like, "Stop lying about me," with a few extra words I won't repeat because it was ugly. I hit send and immediately felt my stomach drop because I knew I'd just opened the door again. He responded within seconds, like he'd been waiting. "See?" he wrote. "This is what I mean. You're out of control." I stared at the screen and felt this wave of shame, because he was right about one thing. I was out of control in that moment. I was reactive. I was wounded. I wanted to bite back. And he used it exactly the way I knew he would, as proof that I was the problem. I blocked him again and sat there in my car in a grocery store parking lot, crying so hard my chest hurt, because I hated that I'd handed him ammo. When I told my lawyer, he didn't scold me, but he gave me that look like, "Please stop doing that." He said, "Don't communicate directly. Let everything go through counsel." And I nodded, wiping my face like a child. We did one mediation session, the kind where you sit in a small office with a mediator who speaks in a calm voice like they're trying to stop a fight at a daycare. My ex showed up with the woman waiting in the hallway, which felt like a deliberate insult. I saw her through the glass and she smirked when she caught my eye, like she was proud to be part of the process that should have been between me and my husband. I wanted to storm out. I wanted to throw a chair. Instead, I sat there and folded my hands and pretended I wasn't shaking. The mediator asked us to talk about our goals, and my ex said his goal was a fair split and moving forward peacefully. He said it with this calm voice that would have sounded reasonable to someone who hadn't watched him kiss his girlfriend in our doorway. I wanted to scream, "Peacefully? You picked the least peaceful way possible." But I didn't. I bit the inside of my cheek and let my lawyer talk. At one point, my ex tried to suggest I should move out quickly because it wasn't healthy for me to stay in the house. He framed it like concern. I almost believed it for a second, because that's how manipulation works. It puts on a sweater and calls itself kindness. Then his mother's lease came up and his face tightened, and I remembered. He didn't care about my health, he cared about access. The mediation ended with nothing resolved because he wanted more than he deserved, and I was too angry to give it. I walked out to my car and saw the woman leaning against the wall outside, checking her nails like she was bored. When she looked up, she mouthed something like, "Good luck," and the fake sweetness in it made me want to scream. I drove away gripping the steering wheel too hard, shaking with rage, and I realized I was going to have to survive the long way. There wasn't going to be a quick, clean ending. There was going to be months of this. It never turned into actual charges, which sounds wild, but neither of them wanted the night of the party turned into a public record, with witnesses describing exactly why his subordinate was there. He wanted it to be a symbol of my instability. His lawyer brought it up in a hearing, the way someone brings up a stain on a shirt like, "Look at this." and my stomach dropped because I didn't want that moment to define me. But then my lawyer asked, calmly, how many witnesses were present that night, and the room shifted. Because there were so many people who had seen him kiss his girlfriend in front of his wife, so many people who had heard him justify it, so many people who could confirm that the woman provoked me in my own doorway. I hated that it came down to that, to witnesses, to proof, to people validating my reality, but I also felt this grim gratitude that my humiliation had been public. It meant he couldn't gaslight me alone. The hearings weren't dramatic. They were fluorescent-lit rooms with uncomfortable chairs and tired faces. They were my husband showing up in a cheap suit that didn't fit quite right anymore, eyes hard, trying to look like the victim. They were me trying to keep my hands from shaking while I answered questions about my own marriage like I was describing a job I'd quit. In the middle of all that, I started looking through our finances because I had to, because divorce forces you to stare at numbers you avoided during marriage. It didn't feel like snooping, it felt like survival. During the financial disclosures, when my lawyer requested account lists and tax documents, something popped that I didn't recognize. A separate savings account under his name. Not a few $100s. A lot. Quietly. While I thought we were tight and being responsible, while I thought we couldn't afford vacations, couldn't afford dinners out, couldn't afford me going back to school, he'd been building a cushion for himself, and I'd been living on faith. I sat at the table with papers spread out, and I started laughing, and then I started crying, and then I did both at the same time like a person in a breakdown montage. Except there was no music. Just me and the hum of the refrigerator. When I confronted him through the lawyers, he acted offended, like I was accusing him of a crime. I saved, he said in a message, and I could almost hear his voice. Someone had to be responsible. I wanted to scream. Someone had to be responsible. And he thought that meant hoarding money while I made our home comfortable and gave up my career. He thought responsible meant planning for his escape. The divorce took months. 7 months of meetings, documents, waiting for court dates, waiting for him to respond, waiting for my own life to restart. In the end, we settled. I got a portion of what he'd saved. I got one of our cars. I got some shared property. It wasn't a fair trade for the years I'd given up, but it was something. It was enough for me to breathe without feeling like I was drowning. The day it finalized, I sat in my car outside the courthouse and just stared out the windshield. I expected to feel free. Instead, I felt empty. Like I'd been holding my breath so long I forgot how to inhale properly. His mother squeezed my hand. "You did it," she said, soft. I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I did." A couple weeks later, I took my first trip alone in more than a decade. Nothing fancy. A small beach town, a cheap rental, the kind of place where you can walk outside and smell salt and pretend your life isn't on fire. I sat on the sand with a paperback I barely read and watched families play in the water and felt this stab of grief, because that could have been me, if he'd been a different person, if I'd chosen differently, if life was fair. But then I felt something else too, this quiet, stubborn hope, because I was still here. I wasn't dead. I wasn't destroyed. I was just rearranged. When I came back, I did the unglamorous work of rebuilding. I updated my resume, which felt like introducing myself to myself. I took a part-time job at a small boutique owned by a friend of a friend, mostly because I needed something to do and I needed to feel useful. I worked folding clothes and helping customers and pretending I wasn't thinking about how I used to have bigger plans. Humbling is an understatement. His mother stayed in touch. Not as my mother-in-law anymore, technically, but as this fierce older woman who had chosen me when her son didn't. We'd have coffee, talk about normal things, complain about weather, complain about grocery prices, and then suddenly one of us would mention him and the room would go cold for a second. We didn't pretend. That was the difference. We didn't pretend anymore. Months passed and I landed a full-time job again, in an office role that wasn't glamorous but paid enough for me to feel stable. My days became routine. Wake up, coffee, commute, work, come home, dinner, shows, bed, normal, boring, healing. There were still weird moments that blindsided me, like the first time I saw someone who looked like him in a coffee shop and my whole body went cold, or the first time I heard a song in a grocery store that had been playing at our wedding and I had to abandon my cart like it was cursed. Healing was not a straight line. It was more like I'd be fine for 5 days, and then cry because I couldn't find a specific mug, and suddenly it felt like I'd lost my whole life again. I also had this stretch where I got obsessed with checking the woman's page on a social media app, even though I knew it was poison. I'd unblock her, lurk, Reblock, like I was trying to control my pain by staring at it. She posted vague quotes about choosing happiness and protecting your peace. And every time I saw it, I wanted to throw my phone. I hate admitting that I cared. I hate admitting it got under my skin. But it did. Eventually, I deleted the app for a while because I realized I was volunteering to be hurt. On a random Tuesday, I ran into my ex at a discount store. Not a dramatic run-in, just a bad timing moment in the aisle with cleaning supplies. He looked thinner, tired, like reality had been loud. He froze when he saw me, like he didn't know which version of me to expect, the woman who threw cake or the woman who cried on the couch. I felt my heart jump, and then weirdly, I felt calm. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, maybe apology, maybe blame, and I cut him off by just walking away. No speech, no confrontation. I grabbed what I needed and left. In the car, my hands were shaking, but I also felt proud, because I didn't give him a scene. I didn't give him access to my emotions. I just took my life and carried it out the door. And then one day, at a friend's small gathering, I met someone. Not in a magical way, not in a movie way, just in a we kept getting stuck in the same conversation circle way. We talked, we laughed. He asked me questions that weren't about my ex. I caught myself smiling without thinking. It startled me, honestly. I didn't jump into anything. I didn't trust my own judgment. But slowly, I let it be something. I let someone into my life without trying to force it into a shape. It was gentler. It was quieter. It didn't feel like a performance. Meanwhile, my ex and the woman stayed together, at least for a while. That part came to me through mutual acquaintances, through small-town gossip that traveled like it had legs. People said she was struggling at work after being transferred, that no one wanted to collaborate with her, that she'd lost the shine she used to have. People said my ex was working a lower position now, trying to rebuild after being fired, complaining about money like he'd just discovered rent was real. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't mourn it. I just noticed it, like the universe finally balancing a little. About a year after the party, almost exactly, his mother came over for coffee. She looked tired, but there was something amused in her eyes, like she'd been holding in a story. He called me, she said. I tensed automatically. What now? She took a sip. Slow. He asked if he could rent the house, she said, and her mouth twitched. I blinked. The house, I repeated, because it sounded too ridiculous to be real. She nodded. He said he's having trouble, she said, and her voice turned sharp. He said he needs somewhere stable. He said he made mistakes. He said he misses home. She snorted. Home. I felt my stomach twist, not with pity, but with this strange anger. Because of course he wanted what he'd thrown away. Of course he wanted the comfort he'd treated like a given. What did you say? I asked, already knowing. His mother set her cup down and leaned forward. I told him no, she said. Simple. I told him I remember the way he walked into that house with her. I remember the way he spoke to you. I remember the way he spoke to me. I told him he can rebuild his life, but he can do it without using mine as a safety net. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Thank you, I said quietly. She waved her hand like she didn't want gratitude. I'm not doing it for you, she said. But her eyes softened. I'm doing it because he needs to learn that love isn't permission to hurt people, and then come back for comfort. We sat in the kitchen and talked about normal things again. And since I know people always ask this part, no, I didn't stay in that house forever. I rented from his mother just long enough to get steady again, then moved into my own small place closer to work. And the person I started seeing, we're taking it slow. That's all I can handle. I didn't feel dramatic about it. I didn't feel like giving a speech. I just felt this quiet certainty, like a line had been drawn, and I was on the other side of it now. Later that night, I stood in my living room, the same room where people had once yelled, "Surprise!" And I thought about how I'd wanted to make my husband feel loved, how I'd wanted to protect him from fear, and how he'd repaid that with humiliation. I thought about the part of me that had blamed myself for years, the part that had shrunk to fit his expectations, and I felt this mix of sadness and relief. I won't tell you I forgave him, because I didn't. I won't tell you I'm grateful it happened, because I'm not. But I will tell you that I stopped trying to make sense of it in a way that excuses him. I stopped rewriting my own pain to keep the peace. And I stopped believing that loving someone means you have to let them break you. I went to bed that night in a house that wasn't mine on paper but felt like mine in spirit. And for the first time in a long time, I slept without waking up with my heart racing. Not because everything was perfect, but because I wasn't waiting for him to come back and explain why I deserved what he did. I already knew the answer to that, and it wasn't about me.